Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Merlin, Season 1, Episode 11, The Labyrinth of Godreth. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary reminder of exactly what happens within this episode. So we start the episode with Arthur and some knights hunting while Merlin tags along, and Merlin is sent to flesh an animal out, which is where he meets the unicorn, which he is in awe of. And while he is standing in awe, Arthur comes up and kills the unicorn. And Merlin, of course, is devastated by this because it was such a beautiful creature. But Arthur sees no big deal and brings the horn back to Uther as a trophy. However, the next day, the crops have all died, and Gaius has warned that those who kill unicorns have misfortunes befall them. And then you see the curse getting worse. There's the water turning to sand, and the food needs to be rationed. And Merlin and Arthur encounter Anhora, who ends up being the keeper of the unicorns, and he warns them that by killing the unicorn, they have unleashed a curse. Well, Arthur has unleashed a curse upon his people, and that he is going to be tested, and as he is tested and passes the test, the curse may lift. However, if he fails the tests, the curse will be permanent, and Camelot will be doomed. We then have Arthur and Merlin protecting the grain stores against looters, and this is when Evan comes in and attempts to steal and comes up with a sob story about how he has 3 children, they haven't eaten, they're starving, and Arthur comments that Uther has put out a law that any looters are to be executed, but taking pity on the man, Evan, he then lets him go, and Honora then shows up. Or rather, no, Honora doesn't show up, but Evan's personality kind of changes when he's let go, and in addition, Arthur gives him the grain that he was about to loot and tells him that it will be its own reward. The next day, the water that had turned to sand becomes water, and that is the reward. And this is when Arthur starts to believe in the curse and the tests. And so he and Merlin decide to seek out Honora. And while in the woods, he comes across Evan. And Evan is sitting in a sort of makeshift shelter filled with overflowing bags of grain, fruit, vegetables, some weapons, shields, materials, basically a little shelter filled with abundance, and Arthur realizes that he is a thief, and then he gets taunted by Evan, talking about how you didn't really believe my sob story, did you? Boy, you're too soft to be king. Your father must be so disappointed in you, blah, 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 all the things that would push his buttons, and Arthur then does give in to his instinct and basically tells Evan to pick up a sword, and they have a sword fight until Evan loses, and then he vanishes, and Honora arrives, and this is where we find out that Evan was really always a construct that Honora had created in order to test Arthur, but in this case, he failed the test because even though he had damaged Arthur's honor by his provocations, Honora tells him you could have ignored those provocations and just continued on with your life, but you chose instead to kill this man. That shows who you truly are. You failed. And obviously, when they go back to Camelot, wells are dry again, food's all still dead, and Arthur is, of course, very upset by the fact that he has failed the tests, and then Uther decides to cut off the rations to the people, and so they are now going to all be starving, and Uther even says if you had taken care of the sorcerer, our people wouldn't be starving, even though he's the one making the decision to cut off the grain to the people. And so Merlin, on his own, goes out into the woods calls for Honora, and begs another chance from Arthur, stating that he would trust Arthur with his life. Honora agrees to give one more chance and tells him to send Arthur to the Labyrinth of Gedreth, where he will face his final test. Merlin does so. Arthur decides to go alone. Merlin ignores this and follows anyways. And as they are in the labyrinth, Merlin is captured by Honora, and Arthur then makes his way through the maze, and when he comes out on a beach is a table with two goblets, and Merlin is sitting there, Honora is there, and then he obviously takes the spot across from Merlin, and basically rules are one goblet has poison, one does not have poison, each person can only drink from one goblet. And they reason out all the usual tricks until eventually Merlin says that if they pour all the liquid into one goblet, they are sure it is poisoned, and then whoever drinks that will have only drank from one goblet and therefore fall within the rules. And Arthur, of course, compliments him in a backhanded way with surprise over how smart he is, before he then, basically does a point and look over there and basically combines the goblets and drinks the poison, falling. And then, Merlin is like, "You've killed him," and like basically scolds Honora for like killing Arthur, but Honora tells him to calm down. It's just a sleeping poison because he never said the poison was deadly. And that Arthur passed the test because he was willing to sacrifice himself for his servant and his people, which shows that he is pure of heart. And therefore, once he wakes up and they return to Camelot, things will be going well. When they do arrive at Camelot, they can see the harvest being brought in as all of the plants have started to grow again. And obviously the water is working again, so the curse has been completely lifted. And having learned his lesson, Arthur then takes the unicorn horn, buries it in the woods out of respect, and then we see that the unicorn is there, and Honora's voice basically narrates that when a person who kills a unicorn proves themselves to be pure of heart, the unicorn then is able to live again, which is very sweet and how we end the episode. So now that we've been reminded of what happens, it's time to rank the episode. Again, we rank on two lists, our mostly objective ranking list and then our personal ranking list after that. So to start off with, we have our mostly objective rank values, and I highlighted the ones that applied to this episode. So first, we of course have our single episode supporting character introductions, which is Honora and Evan. Now, I did debate putting Evan on there because he was essentially a construct of Honora. However, he does play an important role in testing Arthur, and it is a different actor who plays the character with a different name, so I decided to count them as two, which means 1 point each. It's 2 points total. We then have what I feel is an impactful / memorable moment / line / etc., which of course is the goblet scene that proves that Merlin's trust in Arthur is not misplaced because he puts his life in Arthur's hands and Arthur preserves it. So that is good. And of course, the goblet scene, pretty cliche trope. Many different forms of, many different shows have had a similar scene of the pick one of you is going to die type scenarios, and they all kind of end the same way, so that's not really shocking, but I do like that scene more for its meaning within the context of the show, and Arthur being willing to sacrifice himself, which brings us, of course, to our next point, which is, of course, the multi-season main character growth, which has to do with Arthur. When he first kills the unicorn, he sees nothing wrong with it. And then over time, as he sees his people starting to suffer, he slowly starts to kind of understand the gravity of what he has done. And he does eventually accept his fault in what is befalling his people. And then he is willing to take on the test in order to correct his mistakes. And once he has completed his sacrifices to prove that he is pure of heart, he then shows proper respect and buries the horn instead of keeping it as a trophy, happy that he's able to see the unicorn live again because he has proven himself, both probably to himself and of course to Merlin, and to the unicorn keeper Honora. I also think that this plot concept is incredibly strong. I like how focused the episode was. It didn't really go too far off into various antics. It kind of stayed on its course more so than some of the other episodes that we've seen. And I like that it did so because I think that it is an episode that's really valuable for Arthur's character growth and for overall seeing the differences between Arthur and Uther. Uther, who is willing to sacrifice his people and withhold food from them, and Arthur, who is willing to give up his life to protect them and bring their food back. And I love unicorns. And I love the idea of the curse from the unicorn and that the unicorn gets to live again. Overall, I just felt like the entire concept of the plot was a very strong one. And that brings us to 13. However, I did feel that there was one negative, and that was, of course, the negative messaging or behavior, which is a -2 points. And this, of course, is that personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with hunting for food if you are going to utilize the animal that you kill for sustenance, utilize, its hide, its bones, all of like utilize the animal for other purposes. I see nothing wrong with hunting. However, hunting for sport or trophies for no other reason than that you want to kill something, I find incredibly distasteful. And because I find that distasteful and I think that that is very negative messaging and behaviors, hunting for a need, that's just nature. All predatory species will hunt the prey animals for the purposes of survival. So if you are hunting for food or for survival, to use its hide for leather, to grind its bones for glue, to eat the meat and the organs that are inside of it, like that to me is totally fine. That's just nature taking its natural course. Humans typically are a predatory species, therefore they will hunt prey. That is normal, that is natural. However, like I said, killing for the sake of killing, killing for a trophy, incredibly distasteful. That's not okay in my opinion. So I consider that very negative, and therefore that is a -2 points, as I mentioned before, which brings us to a total of 11 out of 10 for the series, or not the series, the episode, and as that is above 10 and the highest score is 10, it's a 10 out of 10 episode. And so as a reminder of our mostly objective ranking so far for season 1, in first place we have, oh, before I go into the list actually, I always like to point out that when on the mostly objective list, more than one episode has the same score. They are just ranked within the episode order that they air in. As because it's mostly objective and based on this score, there isn't really a way to, within the same score group, really actually differentiate which ones are better or worse. And so, because of that, the list is as follows. In first place, The Dragon's Call. Second, The Beginning of the End. Excalibur in third. This episode is our fourth 10 out of 10, and therefore in fourth place, The Labyrinth of Godreth. Then we have Lancelot. Sixth is Valiant. The Poisoned Chalice. The Gates of Avalon. The Moment of Truth. The Mark of Nimue. And then finally in 11th, we have A Remedy to Cure All Ills. So now we come to the personal ranking. And as I mentioned before, I thought this was a very strong plot concept. I like the entire main storyline, and there really wasn't very many side plots to it. Really, aside from this little mini saga of Arthur finding out that there are rat droppings in his room, sending Merlin to hunt the rats, and then once the rat has been hunted, Merlin decides to put it in a stew for Arthur because obviously the food is scarce, and then it kind of backfires because he's then made to eat it. We also similarly, in relation to the curse, later on have basically Gaius and Merlin needing food and basically eating bugs, like large beetles, which Gaius says are supposed to taste like chicken in order to get some protein into them because, again, of the food shortage. Now, I know they're shaped like bugs, and I have no idea what they actually were made out of when they were making it. However, when they do take a bite, I genuinely feel like they look like a hard chocolate shell with caramel inside, and I feel like that would be delicious. Like I said, I don't know what they actually were, but that's what it looked like on screen when they were like biting in. You had like the hard outer shell, which I thought because it was kind of like it looked like chocolate, and then inside there was like a gooey golden, and that was like that's definitely caramel. And I was like, that is a scene I would like if it actually was chocolate filled caramels in the shape of bugs. That is a scene I would have purposely messed up so that I could have kept eating them because that sounds delicious. Of course, it could have been something else that was completely disgusting. I do not know. Obviously, we always have to call out Morgana's wardrobes. I think she has the best wardrobe in the series. Even when she kind of goes bad, her wardrobe is still pretty awesome, but right now it's really awesome. Like there's a scene where she goes out with Guinevere to give some bread to the young and old that they've snuck out of the palace, and she's like wrapped in like this white dress with like this white fur shawl around her, and I'm like, that is so beautiful. Absolutely amazing wardrobe. I also started to kind of wonder while I was watching this episode. In this case, specifically, Arthur brought it on himself. He's the one who killed the unicorn. But I often find it funny how, like, the villains in the series always target Arthur, even though Arthur is the one who is foretold and prophesized to be the good king, to bring everything together, like all of the, to unite Albion, to bring magic back, to be this good positive force in the future, and yet everyone's targeting him instead of Uther. And you'd be like, Uther's the one who's harmed you. Uther's the one whose laws are in place. Uther is the one who has to leave for Arthur's time of abundance that's prophesied to come into play. Why are you not targeting Uther? Why are you always targeting Arthur? I know it's because of the show, obviously. The show is about Merlin and Arthur, so if Uther was the target, that really wouldn't work. But I do think that that is one of the things that is kind of an oversight that's never really explained is why Arthur and not Uther. Although in this particular episode, he killed the unicorn, it was totally meant to be him all along. And then, of course, I also want to call out kind of the music in the labyrinth, like when Arthur and Merlin are going through the labyrinth, the background music there was very, very well chosen. Enough so that even I noticed it, and I usually don't notice those things. But sometimes when it's really good, I notice it. But either way, there wasn't really anything that stood out as dislikable about the episode. There also wasn't anything I was wrong with the episode, really. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was very great. And because I have no negatives at all personally towards it, I am going to agree with our objective score and say that it is actually a 10 out of 10 episode. And so then, as a reminder of our episodes so far, I am going to put. So, The Poison Chalice was also a 10 out of 10 episode. And honestly, it's also similar with like the goblet thing, goblets, poison, similar themes between the two. But I do think I like this one just slightly better because we have the whole curse aspect and it's the main storyline and there isn't really any side ones. So I'm actually going to bring the Labyrinth of Gidreth into first place. Second, the Poison Chalice, the Dragon's Call, the Gates of Avalon, Lancelot, the Beginning of the End, Excalibur, Valiant, the Mark of Nimue, A Remedy to Cure All Ills, and then in 11th we have The Moment of Truth. And now for our series ranking so far. As a reminder, there's 13 episodes in this season, so a total maximum score that was possible was 130. And with adding 10 on our mostly objective ranking, we are now up to 76 out of 130. And then on our personal ranking, we are now up to 70 out of 130 for season 1. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Merlin season 1, episode 11, The Labyrinth of Gadreth. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.